Join lifelong Star Wars fans Lauren and Seth as they dive into the world of Star Wars fan fiction, discussing a new fic each month, breaking down the writing style, characters, canon relationship, and more. This is your source for Star Wars fan fiction recommendations. So come on and find out why it's one hell of a fanfic.
Hey y'all, welcome to One Hell of a Fanfic. I'm Lauren, and welcome to our very first episode that we're doing of this podcast. Steph, how are you doing tonight?
So excited and nervous.
Awesome. Yes, I can relate to that. I'm a little nervous too. It's a little nerve-wracking talking about fanfic while being recorded, but that's okay. We're going to do it, and it's going to be fun.
Yes.
So, Steph, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into fan fiction.
I am, like our intro says, a lifelong Star Wars fan. I grew up around both Star Wars and Star Trek, though, so I didn't really have a preference growing up, which apparently is taboo. You can't like both. I don't care.
It's a sin to not have a preference.
Can we still do this podcast?
I think I need to go. No, I'm just kidding.
But so since that point, I grew up and I haven't really watched Star Trek, but I've watched a lot of Star Wars and read most of the books at this point. I kind of sort of read some of the comics, but ever since I was younger, I've been reading fan fiction. I haven't read it in many years because life mostly, but I've gotten back into reading it, and I love those like different views on the things that happen in canon. How about you? How did you get into this?
Yeah, so also like you, I'm a lifelong Star Wars fan, but fan fiction is something that's a bit newer for me. So if anyone who's listening right now is also somewhat new to fan fiction, or if you've never even heard of it before and you're like, what is this? What's going on? Basically, in a nutshell, what fan fiction is it is regular people who are super, super knowledgeable about whatever fandom they're writing kind of like their own version of the story. And so that's something I've always loved the idea of. Like, I think that sounds awesome, but I just never really got into it until pretty recently. And particularly what kind of drove me into reading more fan fiction was the sequels. Once the sequels came out, there were so many storylines that I wish that they would have taken farther, that fan fiction gave me a really good way to explore that. And I've kind of dabbled in fan fiction for a while, but never really got super into it until very recently when you asked me to join you on this podcast, Steph. So I'm super excited to be like learning more about it together and sharing with other people what we're getting into.
Okay, so let's jump into this story. We picked this one because we both love Reylo. And if for those who don't know what Reylo is, it is the love relationship between Kylo Ren and Rey.
Yeah. I hesitate to call it a romance because, of course, in the movies, they don't get a happily ever after, in my opinion. So,
but that's what fan fiction is for.
Exactly. We will get our HEA one way or another.
What is HEA?
Happily ever after, for short.
Oh, I love it. This is how new to fan fiction I apparently still am.
Well, I'm new to fan fiction, but I know some of the romance lingo, so it's okay. We'll combine our knowledge.
And together, we will create one superpower.
Yes.
Okay, so we chose Skymarked Souls by AnonymousaMink, which you can find on AO3, which is a very large fan fiction website. And they don't have an app or anything, right?
No, they don't. They do have a feature where you can download the PDF or the EPUB document to put on your Kindle, but no, they don't have an app, which is frustrating. I wish that they did.
I did not know that about the PDF. So we picked this one. It is about 22,000 words long. It's 8 chapters. It's a quick read. It took me about 3.5 hours. How about you?
Yeah, I would say about the same. Like, you could read it in like 1 or 2 sittings, depending on how much time you have on your hands. But either way, it's definitely a quick read.
We have decided here on this podcast, so we're going to do what we call the spice level. When because a lot of the fan fictions that we read are romances. We need to let you know how spicy it truly is. So to better explain that, we have created a level system: 0 or no spice. It's not. There's no romance or nothing. It's just it's a story. 1 or mild. It's nothing more than kissing or hand holding, cute things. Medium is implied sex, and we know it's happening, but we don't really see it. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would call it like if closed door or fade to black, meaning they say that that's what they're doing. It's like super obvious that it's happening, but right before it happens, we get cut off. The door is slammed in our faces, so to speak.
Yes. Like PG-14, I think. Is that 14? I think that's what they allow for 14. I don't know.
That sounds about right.
That's what I'd allow my 14-year-old. And then we have level 3, which is hot or spice. It's like you see the sex scene, you see the descriptions of it, you get to play by play. And then we have 4, which is spicy, kinky, and dirty, and maximum spice level. Explicit is probably the best way to put it.
Exactly.
So in this case, for this one, it is more of a mild. We don't get past kissing. Now they are quite hot kissing scenes, but it's just kissing. One of the things that all fan fiction shows is where does it fall in the canon relationship? And this one, it's alternate universe, but we'll get more into that later because there's some little bits about it. And then we also have tropes, which are the common themes that fall into most fan fictions. And this one is enemies to lovers and fated mates, which enemies to lovers is pretty self-explanatory. Fated mates tends to be that trope where they are fated to be together. What else do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I feel like fated mates, it's kind of like, it's another way of looking at soulmates, like it was predestined that that's the match that has to happen.
Yeah. Would you like to fill us in about the author's summary of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the author's summary that was uploaded to Archive of Our Own. So there's no spoilers in this. This is just kind of like an outline of what you're getting into. So I'm just going to read that off. Soulmates get blue marks on their skin wherever their other person gets physical pain. Rey has long wondered whose pain she wears on her skin like blossoms. A brave pilot, a legendary smuggler, a hero. She never expects to find him on the opposite side of the battlefield. Ren has given up on finding the girl who paints his hands and hips sky-like, but then suddenly she's standing over him wearing his new scar. The scar she's cut with her own hand. They have been on a collision course since the day they were born, inexorably drawn to each other, and neither one of them can escape unscathed. So, Steph, if you had to give someone like a quick rundown of why they should read this, what would you say?
I would say it is a quick read where you get to learn about the characters, really get into the story and get all those warm and fuzzies and then move on with your life. Some of us don't have a lot of time.
It's like a perfectly sized snapshot.
Exactly. It's like a snack. It's a book, but it's a snack book. What do they call it? A novella? I don't know.
Yeah.
Why would you read it?
I definitely agree with that. It does a lot without taking up a ton of words, which that can be nice when that's needed. I also, for me, I feel like the chemistry in this is captured so well. It really just kind of takes the chemistry that we know and love and deepens it. And that is something that just really hit me right where it needed to. Yeah, I would say the chemistry is the biggest point for me. And also the writing style is another reason I love this one too. There were times that it just really read like poetry. It was just beautiful.
I agree. All right, moving on to our next segment in this, that was all spoiler free. We're going to move into the spoiler side. So definitely read the story. If you want to go there, come back. But let's jump into the 5 categories that we're going to talk about here, which is canon, writing or plot, characters, our reactions, and our favorite scene.
Perfect. Okay, cool. And I can start us off with canon.
Yeah.
So this story on AO3, AO3 is another name for Archive of Our Own, just in case if y'all weren't familiar. But it was originally tagged as canon compliant because this one was written in 2016. So it is canon compliant up until a point, and then it changes. So the part that is canon compliant is there are some references in this to their duel that they had at the end of The Force Awakens. And that's actually when they realize that they are soulmates, because when Rey wounds Kylo Ren, the same wound like shows up on her face at the same time. And so that's the part that connects with canon. And then after that point, it does kind of change. So it's nice because like you do kind of have like, there's some parts in here and some references that you will be familiar with. And then it also kind of like puts a new spin on the rest of the events that follow.
That's some of my favorite things about this fan fiction itself, is that you get to see those little snapshots of everything we've seen in the movies up to that point, when this was written. Or you see like little bits of their lives, and it matches up, and they make reference to meeting like a little lost droid and meeting new friends and going off and running with resistance. And it's so cute to see those bits.
Yes, I love that line of like, I think it goes, she's fighting alongside legends or something like that, something to that effect. And I just loved that because it's like, yeah, like that's the movie that we watched and that's the movie that we loved. So I do really like how that intro kind of like, it was almost kind of like a crash course of like, okay, here's everything that's happened so far.
Yeah,
and then
how we got there.
Yeah, how we got there. And then it like just takes you from there.
Now, when it comes to writing, we'll talk about things like the writing style, how we feel about it. For me, I absolutely enjoy the character development. You get one of my favorite things about reading compared to movies is that you get to see the inside thoughts of the characters and see in the beginning the way that they think compared to the end, where supposedly things change, and that's what we hope for. In this case, that's absolutely true. What would you like to add about writing?
Yeah, I loved just the actual way that the prose is written, and like the use of metaphor in this one was so good. There's a metaphor that really struck me when I was reading it, when it's in the intro talking about Rey as a kid, and the line goes something like, she picks up languages like scrap from the sand. And I just love that because it's something that's so specific to the character and really just kind of like in one line paints a picture of her life on Jakku. And that is something, just the way that this writer like goes through the lives of these characters and picks up on little details that we saw in the films and expands upon them. That is just something that I absolutely loved about this one. And I guess to kind of get more into characters specifically, because that kind of relates to another thing that I really loved about this one too, is one of my personal critiques of the sequels. Now, I will say overall, I had a lot of fun with the sequels. But one of my things that I didn't love as much is I felt like there were some times that Rey's character was a little bit of a one-note character. She relied a lot on sarcasm, and I feel like that, there's some times that we could have really gone deeper. And I feel like this fanfic really accomplishes that with Rey specifically. Like that metaphor I just mentioned of kind of like how she was living on Jakku and kind of like some little details of her life that I would have liked to have seen more of. This fanfic gives you what you're needing in that area. And so that was really what spoke to me about the characters, is it kind of gave me like a new side to Rey that I've been wanting.
Absolutely. While also staying true to the character in the movies. They called her Caddy at one point, and I was amused by that.
Yes. Yeah, it's staying true to what we've seen, but also like giving us a little bit of a deeper look. And I guess that that's also something, I mean, that could be said about fan fiction in general. You know, that's definitely not just unique to this one writer, even though this writer does it really well. There's so many fanfic writers that give us like such great perspectives on different characters that we probably would have wanted to see in the films, that it just like kind of reminds you of like why it is that we're getting into this, you know?
And what keeps you coming back for more? When I was reading, I noticed reading through it that when I got towards the end, it was like this beautiful. So the beginning starts with like what you expected: two characters on different sides of the war, and it comes together, and then they don't like each other. It's the enemies to lovers trope, where they don't like each other, but now they've started to notice each other. And what I really like about this specific fan fiction is that sometimes with these enemies to lovers trope, you get this, they bond with in like pain, and it can be kind of a little bit I don't know, ugly in some ways. But this one is absolutely beautiful. They're bonding through empathy more than anything else. They see each other's pain, and they start to worry about the other, and they wonder what's going on, and throughout their lives have grown to care for almost who this other person is that they don't know, which was then, because we get to see that moment, they get that shock of, oh my goodness, not this person. And that shock, you feel it within yourself. And it's a lot of fun to read.
Yeah, and I love what you said about like their pain, but it's like it's really angsty, but it's also you can tell that it's building something. It's not just a mess for no reason. You know, it's angsty, but we're accomplishing something here and they're growing in that angst.
Right. Unlike myself in my emotional emo years.
Hey, we all had them.
Oh. Okay, so what was your favorite scene?
So, okay. I would probably have to say my favorite scene is when Rey, she's after, you know, they've been in there. So Kylo Ren, he's in captivity. She's going back and forth in her head about, I don't know what to do about this, because at this point she knows that he's her soulmate. She knows that he's the reason for the marks. And she's about to go to bed one night and she looks down and she sees that her whole body is covered in blue, which means that he's being beaten because it wasn't there earlier. And she like absolutely loses it and like goes and runs and goes absolutely crazy on those dudes. And like, it's like she can, the dark side is like in her because she wants to defend him. I loved that so much. And see, what's funny about this is the reason I almost have a hard time answering that question is because I feel like that scene was so impactful and really showed a turning point for that character. But the one thing that I always think of when I think of this fan fiction is the moment earlier in the story when Rey and Kylo Ren are having a showdown when Rey's on the mission with the Resistance, and one of the stormtroopers shoots at her, and Kylo Ren just throws a stormtrooper. I don't know. My mind always comes back to that. So maybe my favorite scene is a tie between those two moments.
That was fun. I like that you see that scene from both sides too.
Yes.
The stormtrooper scene. I love that was fun to see. That's another thing I love about this is being able to see. There's a couple scenes where you get to see from both sides.
Yeah, like the alternating point of view, it gives you so much more in the story that if we were just seeing everything through one of their eyes, especially without, I feel like especially if we didn't have Kylo Ren's perspective, then we really would be missing something. So I love it that that was really included here and really expanded on.
Absolutely. Now, my own favorite scene, I loved all of chapter 6. That one I was completely enjoyable. But I really liked the end where, well, earlier Rey and Leia were talking, and she's like, I can't save him. And I love that in this fan fiction, the relationship really isn't toxic, where sometimes you see with the enemies to lovers specifically, the relationship can be quite toxic.
Mm-hmm.
In this one, it's not. Rey talks about how she can't save Ren, and she's not going to try. And then at the end, Rey and Ren were talking, and she says that she can't save him. Then Ren was like, Ben Solo doesn't exist anymore, and she's like, well, duh, basically. You're not going to be the same person that you were 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even 1 year ago. And then I love how that chapter ends, where she's like, and for your sake, I hope that this new person isn't a complete asshole.
Yeah.
I laughed so hard. But yes, absolutely. Like, I love that perspective, and the fact that this writer put that in there, that they can't save each other. Everyone's got to make the choices that they're going to make.
Yeah, and another thing I loved about that scene so much too is when she says I can't save him, it made me think of Luke in The Last Jedi saying the same thing to Leia. And like, I love that parallel. Because, you know, in Star Wars canon, we see parallels like that. And so I love it that this fan fiction also had its own parallels in it too. And this was like such a good example of that.
Now, did they even, I guess, would the writer even trying for that? Yes.
I don't know. So I went to compare timestamps. So I know The Last Jedi came out in 2017 and this fanfic was begun in 2016. But I need to confirm if it was completed before The Last Jedi or not. But either way, I mean, whether it was on purpose or not, it worked perfectly. And I mean, that's what matters.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So awesome. Okay. So I guess what we'll get into at this point is we have some, I don't know, I was left with some questions at the end of this. You know, there were some things that kind of got me to thinking about what could have happened from this point. So I kind of wanted to ask you, Steph, and see what your thoughts are. What do you think are the odds of Kylo Ren going fully back to the dark side after him and Rey leave together?
Ooh, the odds. Not super high, not fully back. I'm in my head would say that they're both going to be kind of more in the gray zone. I would lean towards like they'll both go more light side than dark side, because like the light side should always win.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I want. I want them to go to the light side. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting because so they both kind of end the story sort of in the middle. Like neither one of them is fully on one side anymore.
They were already talking too about how Ren was seeing that there's more of a gray area. Not everything is light and dark and evil and good. There is a gray area at the middle.
Yeah, like he says F the dark and the light.
Right.
And Rey at the same time is also, she's recognizing through this. I mean, partially because of the scene that I mentioned earlier about when she gets, you know, really angry at the guys that are beating him up and she force chokes them. She's kind of like realizing that there's darkness in her as well. And it's not just completely, there's not like a clear divide there anymore.
Like she said to Finn, there's at least 80% light still.
Yeah.
However she put that was fantastic.
Yeah, but I guess so. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I think that when they leave together, I expect based on their own individual thought processes that they were having, I expect that they both would continue to be in the middle going forward. Is that kind of where you're at too?
Yeah. They'll find a good middle ground for them. Without the Jedi or the Sith bearing down on them and telling them how they should be, things will be more natural.
That is so true. Because yeah, I mean, half of their problem was they're both being influenced by other people and kind of like what they feel like they think they should do. You know, aside from the fact that Kylo Ren has done a bunch of terrible things, you know, aside from that.
Yeah, just putting that.
Yeah, just don't worry about that.
I have a question for you. When do you think Leia recognized that the sky marks were related between her son and Rey?
Oh my gosh. That, I mean, I think she must have recognized it pretty quickly because it's referenced a few times that this is super rare.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what are the odds? Okay, so like what are the odds that her son has these his whole life, and then also this girl who's like pretty much his same age who shows up also has them, and she's acting all weird and freaked out at, you know what I, now, and when he shows up, I mean, I would think she must have put it together pretty quickly.
She's kind of a smart lady.
Right, yeah.
Then my second time reading through the fan fiction, it kind of hit me a little differently because the first time I didn't really catch it, but then that was the second time reading it through, like the perspective changed. Like, what is Leia thinking at this point? She's probably has to know, because we didn't even know about all of, like, really put things together. We're still like reading the story for most of it, and then thinking about the interactions between Leia and Rey throughout it. She's got to know, and she's got to feel something towards Rey, and is she like a daughter to her almost? And it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, and I mean, thinking more about kind of Leia's reaction to it too, when she gets into this whole, she says to Rey, she's like, what we're doing here is like, you need, if you have a connection with somebody, you need to see that through. And it just really got me, it really got me to thinking about like what Leia personally has been through, and how I'm sure that her own issues that she had with Han probably really influenced the way that she felt like Rey and Kylo Ren should deal with this. Because since Leia, I mean, she was with Han, but I mean, we know that they ended up not working out in the end because they both had other things that they put before the relationship. I would feel like if Leia did notice it quickly, which I feel like she probably did, then that must have influenced, pretty much everything that came after that of, I messed up on this, so I don't want Rey to mess up on it too.
I didn't even thought about that line, where she told her to, well, go off and find, or you must pursue this. Well, what could she have been thinking at that time? Because she also later on was like, didn't expect Rey to save her son, but in some way she might somewhere down have hope that, because that's her thing, hope that could bring her son back.
That's true. Yeah, and it also makes me wonder if she was even surprised when they left and when Rey left the Resistance.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the ending, how did you feel about the ending?
It was hard for me to, I don't know. I mean, I had mixed feelings because so I think if I'm thinking about the films, it's hard for me to imagine Rey leaving the Resistance. However, with the fact that this author set up throughout this fanfic that Rey does not feel at home in the Resistance, and she's very isolated, and people aren't really very accepting of her after they find out about the marks, and she's really just having a hard time, then it's easier for me to see her leaving, because being there at all is painful.
Absolutely. I hadn't looked at it that way. You're right. Because even Poe, they'd talked about, was like there was a distance. They're no longer best friends. There's just something there now.
Right. Like Poe can't really get over it. It sounds like Finn was able to forgive her pretty quickly because, of course, that's the Finn that we know and love. But pretty much everybody else kind of kept her at arm's length. And I mean, it was kind of rude to her about it, it sounded like. What did you think about the ending?
I looking at it that way, I absolutely agree with you. I prefer, personally, would have ended it at the end of chapter 7. I love how chapter 7 ended. It's when Rey had started seeing the same thing you were talking about earlier, where Rey had noticed that Kylo was being beaten while she had fallen, and he had noticed that, like, all of the bruises, and she was not there. And that whole scene, just, I loved it. How he became like, not selfless, because it is for him too, but he was so adamant that he wanted to get to her that he he was trying so hard, and it was intense, and it was wonderful. And at the very end, then they finally come together, and I'll have to pull it up. I love the way it ended. She leans her head against the bars, cold metal offset by the warm weight of his shoulder beneath her cheek. No matter how wrong it may be, this feels right. There will be no going back. And it would have been such a perfect ending.
Would you have not wondered though about like how are they gonna figure this out? Like how what are they gonna do?
I mean, like, it's perfect. That's the end. That's what I needed.
You're like, all I care about is that they ended up together. I don't care how it happens.
Your HEA. So speaking of the end, this is the end.
Yes.
So next month, what are we reading?
Next month, we are reading Works Without End by Diasterisms. So this one's going to be a similar length. And we're going to kind of do this very similar, tackle it the same way that we did this evening. So if you want to join us for the next one, take a look at it on Archive of Our Own. That's where we get all of our Star Wars fan fiction. It's a massive fanfic database. And yeah, so it's called Works Without End by Diasterisms.
We will link that in our description. And here is our social media. You can find us on Instagram and here on YouTube. We will be also taking the audio, cleaning it up, and tossing it out to Spotify and all the other Apple podcasts. And if you want to hear more, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Yeah, so then when we post a new podcast, you'll see it pop up in your feed.
Thanks so much for following along with us on this fun little journey we're on. And
yes.
until next time.
I'm excited. Thanks, y'all, for joining us.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much for joining us at One Hell of a Fanfic. On this podcast, we discuss Star Wars fan fiction, but we do not own the rights to Star Wars or any of the written works we cover. We have no affiliation with Lucasfilm or the fanfic authors we credit for their work. For questions, please email us at onehellofafanfic@gmail.com.